Hello and welcome to another edition of the College Pride Press podcast. As always, I am your host, Brad Kruppel, and I'm joined by the CPP Sunday podcast co host, Brett Siegel, and he is also our NBA draft extraordinaire. So we want to jump on the podcast and do just a quick 45-minute podcast about the NBA Combine and decisions that are still yet to be made for some underclassmen that could return to college or could stay in the NBA. So I'll just open up to you, Brett, to kind of get your thoughts on the combine and anything that stood out to you.
What's going on, College Pride Press listeners? If you got a chance to watch the NBA Combine this week, you were not disappointed by what you saw. We saw a lot of breakout talent come out, and we got to see what could be the first none-and-done player in Hamidou Diallo out of Kentucky just demolish everybody in some of these leaps and vertical jumps. And it was just a show to see with some of these guys that we haven't really seen a lot of, whether you're on the East Coast or West Coast, and really get to see them against some of the best talent in this year's NBA draft. So it was a really fun weekend to watch some of these kids play. And it should be interesting within these next few weeks with the draft lottery being tomorrow night. We'll get a better idea of where some of these top prospects will be falling.
Yeah, and I want to hop right into it and kind of start on a positive note. Give me a few players that you think really kind of help their stock with this NBA Combine and some of the first original workouts as they kind of get into those.
One player in particular that I actually released an article on him today, the center from France, Jonathan Jean, just an absolute huge person. He measured at 7'3" without shoes on, with a wingspan of 7 feet 6.5 inches. And this guy is just huge, and nobody even matched up to him with all the other centers with his height. The only other player that had a similar wingspan to him was Ike Enibogu, and he just blew out the entire field with his athletic ability for how big he was. So he really impressed me at the combine. Another player that impressed me for the most part was Frank Jackson. We didn't really see a lot of him this year at Duke, with Grayson Allen and Matt Jones really taking the guard roles there. Frank Jackson was kind of like a second thought for Coach K. And he had a pretty good combine. He was the fastest out of everybody in the shuttle run with a 2.7 seconds. And some of his measurements were pretty impressive too, for his height or for his position. So I think between Jackson, Jean, and as I mentioned, Hamidou Diallo, I think those are the three biggest takeaways and big surprises for everybody at the combine, because those are three maybe late first round guys, early second round guys that lots of NBA scouts have been looking at and not really sure where they fall on the draft board. And I think a lot really impressed NBA personnel the past weekend and really moved up the draft boards a little bit.
All right, and Hamidou Diallo, we're going to discuss him specifically in a few moments, but real quick, I want to get maybe a few players that hurt their stock in the NBA Combine, or maybe hurt themselves in that they didn't even get invited to the Combine.
Yeah, one of the two losers for me of the weekend that were teammates in college. That was DJ Wilson and Moritz Wagner. DJ Wilson suffered, I believe it was a quad injury during some of the workouts, and he did no agility testing, no 5-on-5 play. So teams really didn't get to see what he could bring to the table, which makes me believe he's going to be going back to school just because nobody really saw what he could do. And then with Wagner, he didn't shoot well when he was doing the scrimmage. His measurements weren't too impressive. He went 1 for 8 from three in his combined 2 days and 3 for 15 from the floor. He measured a 32.5 vertical leap, which was 40th out of 55 players, and that didn't help his stock either. So Moritz Wagner and DJ Wilson were my biggest losers of the weekend.
Wow, the two Michigan guys getting slammed for the weekend. That's very interesting, and those are going to be two of the big decisions that we have coming up. That those guys will really shape the Big Ten next year. Who's going to be second fiddle to Michigan State? That's going to be decided by whether Wagner or Wilson decide to come back. All right, so we got a few decisions here. Do you think that we got any clarity on some of these decisions coming up with these underclassmen with the combine?
Yeah, I think we do. Like with the two players we just talked about out of Michigan, since they both did not have impressive combines and they were right now borderline for the draft and not really know where they would fall, I think it kind of makes a decision more clear for them whether or not they should stay in school. But then you look at a player um, out of Arizona like Raleigh Alkins, who had a pretty good combine for the most part in the scrimmages. I don't have his stats in front of me at the moment, but from what I saw in the scrimmage, he kind of took control out there and was playing the point for the most part. And he looked pretty solid. He was shooting well in the first game. He didn't shoot as well in the second game. The second game I have here, he scored 4 points in 13 minutes, had 1 rebound, 2 assists, 1 turnover. But he protected the ball for the most part in that first game where he played really well. And he shot, I think it was 3 of 5 or 3 of 6 from downtown in the NBA 3 point range. He wasn't really a big 3 point shooting guy in college at Arizona, but he did shoot well and he had a pretty good impressive combine with the agility testing too. So a guy like him, where we're not really sure if he's going to be going back or not, I think it makes it kind of up in the air now because lots of people thought he was leaning towards going back, but now he may be staying in the draft.
Well, and Arizona is going to be one of the consensus, top three teams when the preseason poll comes out. So Alkins is going to be very interesting. I was very high on Alkins coming out of high school, and I really don't think that Sean Miller, ran enough sets for him and gave him some touches that he really deserved. He's a bumbling guy. He needs to get going towards the rim, and he's going to go downhill and be in attack mode and let the jumper play off of his strong drives. And I think that's the way his game needs to go instead of kind of sitting in the corner and you know you know catch and shoot threes. I don't really think that's the best situation for him. So I think the best is yet to come for Elkins, whether he goes in the draft or comes back to college. I think the best is yet to come for him, and I think he will kind of find a comfort zone next year if Sean Miller puts the offense more in his hands. Another guy I wanted to ask you about was one of your own from Louisville, Deng Adele. What are your thoughts on his decision whether to come back or to stay in the NBA draft?
Yeah, I didn't really see much of Adele when I was watching. I was watching on and off during the broadcast, but I mean, he didn't play at all in any of the games. I don't believe. I think he only did some measurements. I'm not sure if he did any of the agility testing or not. I'd have to check, but I think for his sake, he should return because he's still pretty raw. No, but he doesn't really have a go-to skill set per se. He's good defensively, like a lot of the guards coming out of Louisville, and he shows spots of shooting and he can shoot at sometimes, but then other times he really struggles and kind of just throws up shots instead of passing or creating space. So I think for him, these next 2 years could really be beneficial. Even this next year could be beneficial for him to step into a leadership role at Louisville, where he would be one of the veterans on the team and really solidify his mark as that go-to guy and really improve upon his shooting this summer. I just don't think he's ready for the NBA at this time.
What about Trayvon Blewett?
Again, it's kind of an unpolished shooting for Blewett this season. Spots of greatness and then other times just slumping. I think it's another one of those cases where if he does return, he can step up into that leadership role, which he would be at Xavier with a pretty solid recruiting class coming in for them again, and really stepping up in the Big East and being one of the faces of the Big East for Xavier. If he was to declare, maybe a very late second round at most. It's just from my standpoint, from lots of NBA personnel standpoints, from what I believe, see him as very unpolished and he's not a complete project yet for them.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see what Blewett is because they do have some top recruits coming in Xavier, so they could be a very interesting team next year, even with the loss of Ed Sumner. They're going to have Paul Scruggs coming in, who's going to step right in and be able to handle the ball and guide them to success. I think if Blewett's there, they're going to be able to contend with the top of the Big East and be a top 25 team for the most of the season. Without Blewett, I think they're a good team, but I think they're more of a fringe tournament team than anything else with the departure of both Blewett and Ed Sumner. Another player I want to talk about briefly is North Carolina center Tony Bradley, who was a freshman. Was he more, kind of testing the waters, or is he seriously considering going to the NBA?
I think he's seriously thinking about going into the NBA, and he didn't have a bad combine from a measurement standpoint. Um, Coming in, I believe he's declaring as a true center. So he has a lot on him with some of these big name centers coming out in the draft, but he didn't do too bad with the measurements. He came in at around 6'11 with shoes. Standing reach was 9 feet and 4.5 inches, coming in at around 250 ish, wingspan of 7'5", which was really good compared to some of these other players. Some of the top wingspans were, as we said earlier, Jonathan Jean and Ike Anabogu at 7'6" and a quarter inch. So he was just an inch and a quarter behind them for the wingspan. And that's what really impressed a lot of NBA personnel at the combine, because Tony Bradley really didn't display a shot blocking ability this year. He was a pretty good defensive player for North Carolina and really helped them in the tournament in some games late down the stretch defensively. But teams really didn't know how long this guy really is. And that's something lots of teams like coming into the NBA with young guys that they can teach to become a defensive star or a shot blocker, much like Rudy Gobert a few years ago. He was lengthy and had a really big wingspan. Utah Jazz bring him into a system where his defense skills could really shine. And he's now one of the best shot blockers in the game. So I see a similar pattern here with Tony Bradley, a guy who has a tremendous wingspan, not really seen as one of the top prospects coming out of college, but could end up maybe early second round if he declares, could find his way earlier than that on some teams' draft boards, depending on who goes where. And if teams really see him developing nicely into their system.
Now we're going to go through some of the rest of the big decisions that have to be made. But real quick, I want to mention that Brett will be coming out with his new NBA big board sometime next week. We'll have the lottery will be set by then, so we'll have more clarity as we get into more big board and mock draft kind of situations. We'll be able to get some team fits in there. So be sure to look out for Brett's big board with 100 players on it, and then we will be doing top 20 for each position as he did for the last board. So be sure to look for that next week, as it's definitely a phenomenal read, and it's a great way to kind of track your favorite college players and your NBA teams at the same time. So next player I want to talk about is Hamidou Diallo, the man that everyone seems to be talking about. He sat on the bench and practiced with Kentucky for the second semester last year, and now he's decided to declare for the draft. And going in, I knew his measurables would be absolutely insane. He set a combine record, or he was pretty close to it for the vertical leap. He is the most athletic player in this draft, and he's the most athletic player to come into the league since probably Andrew Wiggins, or right up there. So this guy is legit. But what are your thoughts on kind of practicing for a half a year and then potentially going to the NBA? And where do you think he would end up if he does stay in the NBA draft?
Yeah, from what I've seen and what I've heard on the Twitterverse and around, uh, Diallo's kind of flirting with a late first round at the moment after the NBA Combine, and he came out as a shooting guard and a small forward, kind of a stretch 2, 3, and teams saw how athletic this kid really is. I mean, his hands were enormous. His height we saw was 6'5", so pretty good for a solid 2 in the league. But then it was his wingspan just drawing people in, and then his leap was just unbelievable. His max vertical leap almost at a combine record. He went 44.5 in the air, and then his shuttle run of 2.79 was the best among all forwards in the draft. His three-quarter sprint was the best of all forwards in the draft at 311. So I think Diallo really showed how physical he is and how great conditionally he is. And I think this kid really could move up draft boards, maybe in the 20s to 30 range now, just because of the combine he put on. Teams can see how much of a beast this kid is coming in with measures. It's just a matter of whether or not he can shoot. And I'm sure he'll get all those pre-draft workouts in, and teams will be able to see his shooting ability. He didn't play in the 5-on-5 which makes a lot of people skeptical of whether or not he's going to stay in the draft. So based on Diallo's performance at the combine, I do think he will stay in the draft. I think he's going to be flying up draft boards and probably fall within the 20 to 30 range.
I mean, it's very interesting to see what he does because he could go, and I think he could even creep up into the teens in terms of this year's draft. But I can also see him if he goes back to college. I can see him being a top five pick. He's got that kind of athleticism. If he has a decent shooting year and really shows off that athleticism at Kentucky, he can really become something special and move way up the draft boards in what's considered a weaker draft next year. Do you think that, there's a possibility that could happen? Or, what do you compare this year's draft to next year's draft for Diallo's stock?
Well, I think this year's draft is definitely more competitive than what next year's will be. There's just so much talent in this year's draft class. And I mean, yeah, if he does wait a year, he'll probably be a top 20, top 15 prospect next year. But I mean, for him, I think it would be smart to just declare this year, not risk an injury next year, regression or something happening in what would be, I guess, his freshman season at Kentucky, maybe lack of minutes too there and regression on the bench. So I think if he's eligible now and based on what he did at the combine, I think he should declare and just stay in the draft because there will be teams just after the lottery that will need his physicality.
All right, next player that we're gonna talk about is Aaron Holiday out of UCLA, the combo sophomore. What are your thoughts on him and his prospects coming in the draft?
Again, it's another player. I don't believe he was invited to the some of the other guards that he would be going up against in the second round. Um, for him and what we saw in college, I think it would be his best decision to go back because he would be that veteran presence on UCLA, assuming that Thomas Welsh doesn't also return. But Holiday would be that go-to three-point shooter, and he could really show what he can do from long range. We didn't really get to see that this year because he took a step back with Lonzo Ball and, of course, the coach's son. I'm drawing a blank on his
Alford,
name.
Bryce
Alford,
Alford.
that's right. Bryce Alford at the two. And so we didn't really get to see much of Holiday per se from long range. He kind of was a second option for Ball and also a role player for UCLA throughout the season. So I think he could step up into more of a veteran role and really make a presence for himself going into the NBA combine and NBA draft next year as one of the veteran guys in the draft and a reliable shooter based on what we saw this year.
All right, that's fantastic. I'm right with you. I think he should go back and kind of strut his stuff at UCLA. The team's still going to be pretty good. Jalen Hands, Chris Wilkes are both very talented players. Obviously, he's not going to be playing with Alonzo Ball, but I think he's going to be able to get more touches and have the ball in his hands a lot more, which will help his stock in the long run. All right, next player that I think is key to his team is SMU's Semi Ojale. He is a guy that if he returns, they are going to be really tough to beat if he decides to go in the NBA draft. I think that they're just an average team in the AAC. What are your thoughts on Ojale?
Yeah, Ojale was just one of those guys that creeped up on my list in the middle of the year and then just started flying up based on what I saw in games with him throughout the year. I loved what Ojale was doing near the end of the year. I thought that he was definitely improving his draft stock. And in one of the scrimmages, he went 25 minutes, made 2 out of 4 of his 3-pointers, 12 points, 2 steals, 3 assists, 4 rebounds, no turnovers. And he was pretty much a all for one guy. He was a really nice team player out there in the scrimmages. Every time one of his players went down on the ground, he immediately ran over. He was the first guy to pick him up. Um, when he was on the bench, he was the guy encouraging. And even though lots of people think, oh, well, he's just kind of like sucking up to some of the scouts like to see that. NBA personnel love to see that guy that picks up everybody else because everybody feeds off that. When everybody on a team has a positive emotion, the team starts shooting well and gaining confidence. And it's clear to determine which guys are kind of putting on a show and trying to win an Oscar by doing that. And then you got the guys like Ojale who really are those team first players and give up the ball even though they have a wide open shot for somebody who has a better shot or a better high percentage shot for them. So Ojale, I think, should stay in the draft. I think he will be around a 30 to 40 range pick, probably early second round. And I think he could wind up finding himself on a 12-man rotation or maybe a year in the D League and then come up and be a nice addition off the bench for some teams just because of his physicality. I mean, Semi Ojale is very physical in the paint, even though he may be undersized against some of these other guys, but he goes hard straight to the basket every time. He has a nice outside game, and I think he really could be a nice role player in a few years.
Caleb Swanigan's going in the draft, right? I mean, why haven't we heard that he's going to stay in the draft yet?
I think it's just the matter of him thinking that because he's a sophomore now, right? Junior?
He's a sophomore.
Yeah. So next year, let's say he does stay in college, he would undoubtedly be the number one junior in the nation and probably the front runner for National Player of the Year. Um, Now, like we've said multiple times, and I agree with what you've said, Brad, that we don't really think he has much more to prove. He's shown his physicality on the offensive, defensive boards. He showed how he can shoot inside. He's developed a nice jumper. There's not really more we can see from Caleb Swanigan. Um, I really don't have an answer to that of why we're waiting to hear from him. Maybe I mean, I just don't know. Maybe to come back and maybe do something at Purdue and make a run in the Big Ten, maybe come back for the tournament. But from an NBA standpoint, Swanigan should absolutely declare. There's no reason to go back to college and risk something happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a slam dunk. He has to go. There's nothing left he can do. At Purdue, he's already got like all these double records and was a first team All American. I think it only hurt himself if he does come back. He could have another season just like he had this year, but I think his stock would fall just in the fact that he's a year older, and teams like guys that are younger and that they can kind of project and maybe develop him a little bit in their system and in their gyms, and that he won't have to worry about classes. But I just think that it's a slam dunk. He has to go. It's time for Caleb Swanigan. Go and cash in. He'll receive a nice paycheck, and he can take all of his family and his handlers out for a nice dinner. And that is it's a slight Purdue slam there, but I had to get in there. I wish him the best. Uh, I think the best decision for him is to go, and that's very rare for diehard college basketball fans to say a first team All American guy should go in the NBA. But I think the time has come for him to go and cash out on all the hard work he's put in.
And it's not like his measurements were bad at the combine either. He had one of the biggest hand Langston widths at the combine, and his wingspan was even up there better than some of the centers and forwards in the draft. So I think he definitely has shown that he could be a big, probably a stretch four in the league.
Yeah, I think he's definitely got stretch four material, and he's developed his jump shot, which his freshman year was below average, but this year I think it really developed and became a threat for him. All right, next player I want to talk about, Thomas Welsh from UCLA. We're hitting up all the UCLA guys. What are your thoughts on Welsh and the decision he has to make?
Yeah, I wasn't too impressed with his measurements at the combine. He came in at 254 weight wise, wingspan of 7 foot, and a standing reach of 9 feet, 1.5 inches. So he was just average for being a 7 footer with shoes on. And then when he was shooting on the side, some of his shooting work wasn't that great either. From what I saw, they showed limited time of the shooting work. Um, so we didn't really get to see much, but he didn't really adjust well to that NBA 3 point line. He didn't do the scrimmages from what I saw. He only was doing some shooting on the side, and it wasn't too great. It is still 50-50 on his decision. We've only really seen agility and measurements for him, so it's really hard to tell where he stands from an NBA shooting standpoint. Probably best benefit to come back to school, but I wouldn't be shocked if he did stay in the draft.
All right, and one last decision we're going to talk about before we move on, and that's big Omer Yurtseven. I've been a big fan of Yurtsevens for a while, and he went to the NBA Combine with a lot to prove, having so much hype coming out of Turkey, I believe he's from, and he had a very disappointing freshman year, and now his coach and Dennis Smith are both gone. What are your thoughts on Yurtseven and his options as returning to NC State does not look very good?
Yeah, I think he had a pretty solid combine for the most part. Year seven, we didn't really get to see much in college. He kind of took a step back with Dennis Smith being the main guy, but he didn't play bad in some of the scrimmages. And then his measurements weren't too bad either, stacking up to some of the big guys. His, where is it right here? His measurements were 7'1" wingspan, which was very nice for a center, and his height came in just under 7 feet. Not much body fat either, 7.6%, which is very good for a center. And then coming in at 250, much like Tony Bradley earlier. So I think he's kind of in the same situation as Tony Bradley when we look at it. Measurements very similar gameplay defensively. You're seven a little more polished on the post play than Bradley. So I think that will benefit him greatly. Um, from what I'm seeing, I think he will stay in the drafts, probably falling somewhere from 30, maybe even late first round, maybe the 25 to 40 area. If he doesn't go late first round, he'll fall definitely within 35 to 40 range. But Omer Yurtseven, most likely probably a 90% lock for the NBA draft at this point.
Yeah, I think it's just smart for him to go. He could really improve his stock, but going back to NC State is so risky. The roster is going to be kind of in shambles next year, new coach, and it's still going to be tough in that ACC. It's going to be tough to win games and kind of show his stuff off um, next year. So I think it's just smart. All right, two guys that have hired agents, but I definitely want to talk about them. De'Aaron Fox and Lonzo Ball. I heard some rumblings going around that some NBA evaluators are saying that they have Fox higher than Lonzo Ball on their draft boards. What are your thoughts on those claims?
It wouldn't shock me, and the only reason I could see that would be from off the court things. Lonzo, of course, everybody knows LeVar Ball, and even though lots of NBA personnel say that's not going to factor into their decision, I think it will because, like we've heard, lots of people saying if you draft Lonzo Ball, you're also drafting the father. And then you got other standpoints like Magic Johnson with the Lakers. We don't know how true it is, but he came out and said you're drafting the son and not the dad, which is 100% true. From my standpoint, I do think Lonzo Ball is a better NBA prospect than De'Aaron Fox and should go higher than him. But it would not surprise me if De'Aaron Fox, depending on how the lottery falls out, if he went a pick before Lonzo Ball, only because of that issue of teams not wanting to deal with the ZO2s and the whole big baller brand issue.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and we're not going to really have a whole podcast about those sneakers because I feel like ESPN has already beat that dead horse over and over and over again. All right. Give the listeners out there a few international players other than Jonathan Jean, who you've already discussed, that they should kind of be watching as they go through workouts and kind of formulate for the NBA draft.
Well, Jonathan Jean, like I said, definitely my favorite international prospect coming into the draft. You can read up on what I said about him in today's article on the NBA prospect Jonathan Jean on collegepridepress.com. But some other international guys that I have my eye on, um, Andres Pasniks from Latvia. He's a 7'2" center. I also wrote an article about him a few days ago, but he's kind
With
of
a very lofty comparison. So that's a teaser. Go on and check that article out because there's a lofty comparison on there.
Yeah, I mean, Pasnick's like the guy I compared him to coming out a few years ago, almost same measurements and same numbers coming out of EuroLeague. So definitely check out that article for more information about him. But definitely him and Gene are two centers to definitely watch in this draft because they're true centers, unlike other guys coming out of college like Justin Patton and Harry Giles, who we don't really know what position they will play. Some other international guys, I do like Frank Ntilikina. I believe it's pronounced. He's a point guard out of France. I currently have him ranked 8th in my top 100 in big board. Um, very, very agile guy. I'll have an article coming out with him within the next few weeks as well, and you'll be able to hear a little bit more about his strengths and weaknesses and a lofty comparison for him as well. But a very crafty guy, true point guard, and he's up there right now with Lonzo Ball, De'Aaron Fox, and Dennis Smith as being some of the top point guards in the draft. So definitely somebody to watch which team gets him on draft day, because there will be teams calling up maybe to trade up for him.
Yeah, those are definitely all guys to watch. And um, if you missed it, we're doing an article on the strengths and weaknesses and breaking down each of the top 30 players on Brett's board. So Brett's been taking a lot of international guys because that's one of his expertises, but Sean and I have been taking a lot of the college guys as well. So we've been posting about one or two of those a day. Be sure to keep an eye on our Twitter account at edu Pride Press for all those articles that get posted. And check out the website too, www.collegepipepress.com. As always, that's the best source. We tweet things out, but if you just go right on the website, that's direct information. All right, next I want you to rank these three big guys that I've been tasked with writing about, um, that are going to be mid to late first rounders, and all have very different skill sets, but they all play the same position. So I got Jarrett Allen, Ivan Rabb, and Bam Adebayo. So rank those three guys in terms of NBA prospect status.
From my point of view and from an NBA draft standpoint, I think Jarrett Allen has to be the number one center out of those three guys. Jarrett Allen suffered tremendously this year on Texas. Lots of hopes going into the season for Texas, and then they just were not as good as all the hype was. But Allen was. I mean, I don't know what recognition he got in the Big 12, but if he didn't get Big 12 first team, I mean, that's kind of a slap in the face to the season that he had. He displayed his rebounding ability, shot blocking ability, and just how round of a prospect he really is. He has skill sets on the offensive, defensive, and he can run the floor for a big guy. Coming in at 6'11", around 230. Jarrett Allen, I mean, he's just a physical freak center, and could wind up going higher than I have him right now. I have him slotted 26, but after seeing his measurements at the combine, Jarrett Allen is definitely a prospect that will be moving up my draft board. I can say that right now, and could potentially find himself within the next few weeks within the lottery. So he's definitely number one on that list. And then the other two you said were Bam Adebayo and who?
Ivan Rabb.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a ooh. Hmm.
Stumped,
I
yeah.
have
I
yeah.
stumped
I have Rab 19 and Bam Adebayo 20 on my past big board. Both pretty similar defensive minded players. Ivan Rab has been a proven shot blocker, and Bam Adebayo, we see dunks and blocks. We haven't really seen much more from him. From NBA standpoint, I would have to rank Adebayo probably slightly ahead of Rab after the
Ooh.
combine. Probably put Adebayo at a 2 and Rab at a 2.1, slightly behind him. Um, I think I'm just going to call it a tie for second at this point. But Bam Adebayo probably slightly ahead of Rab, only because he does have that physical freak nature to him. He can soar up and slam down anything. He's a freak on the defensive rebounding end. His measurements were really good at the combine. And yeah, I just think that Adebayo is a more complete prospect than what Ivan Rabb is.
See, I go the other way. I think Rab is a little bit more complete. Out of Adebayo, his stats are kind of puffed up with some of those cupcakes, as I stated in the Adebayo article that posted before. But he needs to develop a little bit of an offensive game, and I think that's where Rab has, his jumper is a little bit further along than Adebayo, and it shows a little bit more promise. So I think that's where I'd go Rab in front of Adebayo. But I totally agree. Jarrett Allen is absolutely the number one of those three. He's going to be early teens and right in there in the lottery, with the way that he's played, and that team's gone way under the radar after Texas started struggling in the beginning of the year. I think Allen kind of got forgotten, but he still had a huge Big 12 season, and I don't think people will forget that. All right, so next we're going to flip course a little bit and talk about some of the recent commitments. Finally, we got some spring commitments for these recruits, and we finally have a little more clarity about what's going to be going on next year. So, Kevin Knox is going to Kentucky, and Jordan Tucker and Trayvon Duval are both going to Duke. Just want to get brief thoughts, kind of throwing you on the spot here on those commitments and any other commitments you want to take it.
Yeah, out of all the commitments that have happened over the past month, and I think I can speak for a lot of people, the one commitment that shocked me the most was Kevin Knox. I thought he was pretty much committed to Duke at this point. I thought it was gonna like a silent commit type thing, and then Kentucky came out of nowhere and signed him, and it just kind of shocked me. I was surprised that Kevin Knox, I guess you could say, flipped from Duke to Kentucky. I don't know how much Kentucky was involved in the recruiting, but it seemed like from what everybody was reporting that Duke was easily the front runner, and it was North Carolina right behind them. So for Kevin Knox going to Kentucky, I believe that's their eighth recruit or seventh recruit in this year's class. That's just unheard of, and it just adds to the talent and 5 stars for Coach Cal coming into Kentucky. So it's definitely going to be a physical and fast team next year at Kentucky. And then today, the news of Trayvon Duval committing to Duke. Um, Pretty much could say that everybody saw that coming after Frank Jackson declared for the draft because they were just waiting to hear one another's decisions on that. And then the other commitment was another one to Duke in Jordan Tucker within the past week. And it was a nice pickup for Duke, especially missing out on Knox. Jordan Tucker seemed like that he was going to be a lock for Syracuse until Knox flipped his commitment and went to Kentucky. And then Duke immediately soared back into the Jordan Tucker sweepstakes. It was between Syracuse and Duke, Jim Boeheim and Coach K. And Coach K once again getting the better of Jim Boeheim in that one. So I really like Tucker for Duke. He's 6'7", 210 coming out of Georgia, one of the best small forwards in the recruiting class, and he's pretty physical. He could be a really nice follow-up for what they had with Jason Tatum and Brandon Ingram. Obviously not as highly rated as some of those guys, but still a pretty nice shooter. Should develop really nice in Coach K's system.
Yeah, I think Jordan Tucker is a one hell of a consolation prize for the Kevin Knox sweepstakes. Very impressive with Duke to kind of swoop in and recruit this kid for basically a week and then get him to commit. That's very interesting. We still got a ton of spring commitments. Brian Bowen, Mo Bamba, a lot of big names still out there that have yet to pick their schools. Um, it'll be something to watch, and we will have updates on all those guys on the website as well as they kind of cut down their lists and make some more visits and finally make their decisions. All right, one last note I kind of wanted to end off with is no one's really talking about the story the past couple of days, but Jaquan Lyle got arrested the other day, and it came out that he had quit the Ohio State basketball team. And this is a guy who declared for the draft last year and went through the process, then decided to come back to Ohio State. Really sad to see this kid, kind of take a turn for the worse. And we wish him the best and hope that he can kind of find a soft landing spot. He's a fantastic basketball player and had NBA aspirations, and rightly so, as he was very talented. I don't know if Brett wants to give his thoughts to kind of wrap up, but Jaquan Lyle, really sad. Hope he finds a good landing spot.
Yeah, I really don't know much about the situation, but Jaquan Lyle was a heck of a player these past few years for Ohio State. So hopefully he can regroup from this situation, and hopefully we do see him playing basketball again. But from what it looks like, it does not look like he will be with Ohio State anymore.
Yeah, that's really sad. All right, so thanks for listening to another edition of the CPP podcast. It's great to get Brett on here. Kind of just got a one-on-one with me and Brett, talking about some of this NBA draft stuff that he's so knowledgeable about. We are planning on getting a few more guests on. I hope you guys like the Mike DeCourcy pod. Sean and I put some work into that, so we're trying to line up a few more guests. Can't release some of those names, but a lot of those guys are going to be high profile that we're lining up, so you're going to recognize a lot of those names. And be sure to give us a follow on Twitter and subscribe to us on iTunes so you can get the most recent episodes of the CPP podcast and stay up to date on what's going on in this college basketball landscape. All right. Thanks, Brett. And be sure to catch us live for our next edition of the CPP podcast.